The Duke found his bride crying alone in the garden at midnight. He had seen her endure insults without complaint. He had watched her sit through dinners where no one spoke to her. He had watched her smile when his family deliberately humiliated her, but he had never seen her cry, not once. So when Sebastian opened the garden doors that cold November night and found his wife kneeling beside the dead rose bushes, her hands trembling as she tried to hide her tears, something inside him went dangerously still. "Who did this to you?" She immediately wiped her face. "No one, Your Grace." Sebastian took one step closer. His voice became quieter. "Do not lie to me." She looked up at him then, and the pain in her eyes made the most feared duke in the county forget how to breathe, because there was something else in her hand, a small, crumpled letter. And the moment Sebastian saw the seal stamped across it, his expression changed. He knew that seal. It belonged to the one person he had sworn would never come near his wife. "What does that letter say?" he asked. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me." She stood, trying to walk past him. Sebastian caught her wrist, not roughly, but firmly enough to stop her. For the first time since their marriage, the cold Duke looked genuinely frightened. "Look at me." She did, and then he saw the tears she had been fighting so desperately to hide. His grip loosened. His voice broke into something almost painfully gentle. "Tell me who hurt you." She stared at him for several seconds before whispering the words that would change their marriage forever. "Your Grace, I think your family wants me dead." What Sebastian did next would leave the entire household speechless. The following morning, the great dining hall of Blackthorn House was filled with laughter. None of it was meant for her. Lady Eleanor sat quietly at the far end of the enormous mahogany table, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had been Duchess of Blackthorn for only 6 weeks, yet she had already learned the rules of her new household. Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not contradict the Duke. Do not embarrass the family. And above all, never expect anyone to defend you. Across the table, Lady Beatrice, Sebastian's elder sister, lifted her teacup and smiled sweetly. "My dear Eleanor, you look exhausted this morning." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "I did not sleep particularly well." "Oh?" Beatrice's smile widened. "How unfortunate." A few of the guests exchanged glances. Then Lord William laughed. "Perhaps the Duchess is still getting accustomed to country life. London society can be terribly different from this place." Eleanor said nothing. She knew what they were doing. They wanted her to react, but why give them the satisfaction? Beatrice placed her cup down with an elegant little click. "I heard something rather amusing yesterday." Eleanor looked up. "What did you hear?" "That the Duchess was found wandering through the gardens alone last night." The room became noticeably quieter. Eleanor's fingers tightened beneath the table. Beatrice continued. "At midnight." A gentleman near the fireplace raised an eyebrow. "Alone, apparently." Beatrice gave a delicate laugh. "How strange." Someone else whispered. Perhaps she was looking for someone. The laughter returned. Eleanor felt heat rise into her cheeks. She glanced toward the head of the table. Sebastian was there. The Duke had been silent throughout breakfast, reading a letter while the conversation unfolded around him. He heard every word, yet he did not look up. That hurt more than the laughter, because Eleanor had not expected Beatrice to defend her. She had not expected the other guests to defend her, but somewhere, in the foolish little corner of her heart she tried desperately to keep hidden. She had expected her husband to care. Why? Hadn't he chosen her himself? Hadn't he stood before the entire family and called her his wife? So why was he sitting there now, as though her humiliation had nothing to do with him? Beatrice leaned forward. "Perhaps you should be careful, Your Grace. People may begin to think you are unhappy here." Eleanor forced a small smile. "I am perfectly happy. Are you?" The question was soft, almost sympathetic. That made it crueler. Beatrice looked around the table. "Because from where I sit, you seem terribly lonely." A few guests smiled. Eleanor swallowed. Then Sebastian finally lowered his letter. His grey eyes moved slowly across the table. The laughter died. "What exactly?" he asked, is amusing you? No one answered. Beatrice's smile disappeared. I was merely speaking with Eleanor. Then speak to her without making a spectacle of my wife. The room went silent. Eleanor stared at him. Sebastian had not raised his voice. He didn't need to. His words carried the same cold authority that had made hardened men obey him without question. Beatrice lowered her gaze. Of course, Sebastian. He returned to his letter. Just like that, breakfast continued. But Eleanor could no longer concentrate on her food, because for the first time she had seen something beneath his cold exterior. Not tenderness, not yet, but possession. He had called her my wife, and somehow those two words stayed with her long after breakfast ended. But what Eleanor didn't know was that the humiliation at the table had been nothing compared to what was waiting for her that evening, because when the guests gathered in the ballroom for the winter reception, Beatrice had prepared something far more cruel. And this time, Sebastian would not be able to pretend he hadn't seen it. By sunset, Eleanor had almost convinced herself that breakfast had never happened. She returned to her rooms, changed into a simple ivory gown, and spent the afternoon arranging flowers for the evening reception. She told herself she was not afraid, but every few minutes her eyes returned to the small writing desk beside the window. The letter from the previous night was still there. She had not told Sebastian everything. She had not told him that the letter was not the first one. 3 weeks earlier, another had arrived, then another, always without a name, always containing the same warning. Leave Blackthorn House before the first snow, or you will suffer the same fate as the last Duchess. Eleanor had burned the first letter. She had hidden the second, but she had kept the third. Why? Because the third letter contained something neither of the others had, a name, her husband's, Sebastian Blackthorn. Eleanor stared at the words until they blurred. What could anyone possibly want from her husband? And why threaten her instead of him? That was the question she could not answer. The previous Duchess had died 4 years ago. Everyone in the household called it an accident. She had fallen from the eastern staircase during a storm. A tragic accident, an unfortunate slip. A story repeated so many times that people had stopped questioning it. Everyone except Eleanor. Because on the night she arrived at Blackthorn House, she had noticed something strange. There were no portraits of the previous Duchess anywhere in the main hall. No painting, no miniature, not even a photograph. It was as if the woman had never existed. And when Eleanor had innocently asked the housekeeper about her, the old woman had gone completely pale. Never ask about the late Duchess again, Your Grace. That was all she had said, nothing more. Eleanor had obeyed, until now. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Come in. The door opened. It was Mrs. Whitmore, the housekeeper. She stood perfectly straight, holding a silver tray. Your Grace, the Duke requests that you wear the emerald necklace this evening. Eleanor frowned. The emerald necklace? Yes, Your Grace. Why? The housekeeper hesitated. Then, almost reluctantly, she said, It belonged to the late Duchess. Eleanor's heart stopped. Why would Sebastian want me to wear it? Mrs. Whitmore lowered her eyes. I wouldn't know, but Eleanor knew she was lying. She could see it, and suddenly the room felt much colder. She walked to the tray. The emerald necklace was beautiful, deep green stones surrounded by old diamonds, but there was something else beneath it, a tiny folded piece of paper. Eleanor looked at Mrs. Whitmore. The housekeeper's face had gone completely white. Where did that come from? I don't know, Your Grace. Eleanor unfolded it. There were only 6 words. Ask your husband what happened in the garden. Her fingers went cold. The garden. The same garden where she had been crying the night before. The same garden where, 6 weeks earlier, she had found a broken stone bench covered with dead roses. The same garden that Sebastian had forbidden her to enter after sunset. Why? What had happened there? And why did someone want Eleanor to discover it? She folded the note slowly. For the first time, a terrible thought entered her mind. Perhaps the mysterious letters weren't trying to frighten her away from Sebastian. Perhaps they were trying to warn her about him, and if that was true, why had Sebastian looked so terrified when he found her crying in the garden? That evening, Eleanor would finally ask him, but before she could reach the ballroom, someone whispered a sentence that changed everything. The previous Duchess wasn't killed by accident. Eleanor turned. No one was standing behind her, only the empty corridor. And from somewhere in the darkness came the faint sound of a woman's voice. "Ask the Duke why he never tells anyone what happened that night." Eleanor had never been the woman anyone noticed first. She had grown up in a house where beauty was treated like currency, and she had never possessed much of it. Her older sisters had been praised for their golden hair, graceful figures, brilliant conversation, and effortless charm. Eleanor had been praised for being useful. She could mend a torn sleeve. She could remember every servant's name. She could stretch a household budget until the last coin had a purpose. She could sit beside a sickbed through the entire night without complaining. But no one had ever looked at her and said she was extraordinary. Perhaps that was why she had learned not to ask for anything. At 23, Eleanor had entered her marriage to the Duke of Blackthorn, expecting nothing more than a respectable arrangement. She had known Sebastian was wealthy. She had known he was feared. She had heard the stories. The Duke who had returned from the war colder than when he left. The man who had refused 7 beautiful women before finally agreeing to marry. The man who rarely smiled, never danced, and had dismissed an entire room of aristocrats with a single glance. But Eleanor had discovered something the rumors never mentioned. Sebastian was lonely, deeply lonely, and perhaps that was why he frightened her more than his reputation ever could. He was 32, broad-shouldered, imposing, and carried himself with the controlled stillness of a man who had spent years teaching himself never to reveal weakness. A thin scar crossed his right eyebrow. Another disappeared beneath the collar of his shirt. His dark hair was usually combed back with severe precision, and his grey eyes seemed capable of seeing through every lie spoken in his presence. Women wanted him, men feared him, servants obeyed him. Yet Eleanor had noticed something no one else seemed interested in noticing. He never slept through the night. She had heard his footsteps many times after midnight. Slow, measured, always alone. Sometimes he stood outside the library window until dawn, staring into the darkness as if expecting someone who would never return. Who was he waiting for? And what had happened to make a man like Sebastian afraid of his own memories? Eleanor didn't know. She had never asked. Their marriage had been strangely quiet from the beginning. He had never been cruel to her, but he had never been tender either. He gave her everything a duchess could require. Jewels, servants, fine gowns, a private carriage, a beautiful suite, everything except himself. At breakfast he discussed estate matters. At dinner he discussed politics. In the corridors they exchanged polite greetings, and at night they lived in separate rooms. It was a marriage built on distance, yet there were moments, small moments Eleanor could never quite explain. The way Sebastian always slowed his pace when walking beside her. The way he remembered that she disliked overly sweet tea. The way his expression hardened whenever someone spoke to her disrespectfully. The way he watched her whenever he thought she wasn't looking. He seemed determined to keep her at a safe distance. But from what? That was the question Eleanor had begun asking herself. And Sebastian had his own questions. Why did his wife never complain? Why did she smile after cruel remarks? Why did she always look toward the door whenever someone mentioned the previous Duchess? Why had he found her crying in the garden? And most troubling of all, why had the sight of her tears frightened him more than any battlefield ever had? He had married Eleanor because she seemed safe, quiet, undemanding, a woman who would not invade the locked rooms of his heart. That had been the plan. But 6 weeks into their marriage, Sebastian was beginning to realize he had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated her, because Eleanor was not weak. She was simply quiet, and quiet people noticed everything. She noticed the servants who stopped speaking when Sebastian entered a room. She noticed the locked door at the end of the west corridor. She noticed the faded scratch marks on the garden gate. She noticed the way Mrs. Whitmore trembled whenever the late Duchess was mentioned. And now she had begun to notice something else. Sebastian himself, the man behind the title, the wounded man behind the cold eyes, the husband who claimed not to care, yet had followed her into the garden at midnight. So the question was no longer whether Eleanor would discover the secret of Blackthorn House. She would. The real question was this: when she finally learned the truth, would she still be able to love the man standing beside her? And Sebastian had no idea that Eleanor was already holding the first piece of the answer in her hands. The ballroom doors opened at precisely 8 o'clock. Every conversation stopped. Sebastian entered first. He wore a black evening coat, the silver buttons catching the light from the chandeliers. His expression was unreadable, his posture rigid, and beside him walked Eleanor. She wore the emerald necklace. The room noticed immediately. Whispers moved through the guests like a cold breeze. That is the late Duchess's necklace. Why would he give it to her? Perhaps he wants to make a statement. Eleanor heard every word. She kept walking. Sebastian's hand rested lightly against the small of her back. It was the first time he had touched her in public, and everyone noticed, especially Beatrice. Her smile disappeared. The musicians began to play. Couples moved onto the polished floor. Beatrice approached Sebastian almost immediately. "Brother, may I have the first dance?" It was expected. She had danced with him at every important family gathering since childhood. Sebastian looked at her. Then he looked at Eleanor. Eleanor quietly stepped backward. "You should dance with your sister," she whispered. "I will be perfectly fine." Sebastian's eyes narrowed. "Why would I dance with her?" Eleanor blinked. "Because she asked. I heard her." Beatrice's face tightened. "Sebastian." He ignored her. Instead, he turned toward the musicians. "Stop." The music ended. The entire ballroom fell silent. Sebastian extended his hand toward Eleanor. "Dance with me." Eleanor stared at his hand. For a moment she thought she had misunderstood. "Your Grace, I said dance with me, but I don't know the steps. I'll teach you." A shocked murmur traveled through the room. Eleanor looked around. Dozens of aristocrats were watching. Beatrice was staring at her as though she had committed some unforgivable crime. "You don't have to do this," Eleanor whispered. Sebastian's expression softened. "I know." He kept his hand extended. "That is why I am doing it." Eleanor slowly placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Warm, steady, certain. Sebastian led her onto the center of the floor. The musicians began again. At first, Eleanor stumbled. Sebastian adjusted his pace immediately. "Don't look at them," he murmured. "Everyone is staring. Let them. I'll embarrass you." His jaw tightened. "You couldn't." She looked up at him. For one brief second, the cold Duke disappeared. There was only a man looking at his wife as though the rest of the room had ceased to exist. Eleanor's heartbeat quickened. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. Sebastian didn't answer immediately. His hand tightened slightly around hers. Then he leaned closer. "Because you spent 6 weeks believing you had to stand alone in this house." Her eyes widened. "And you don't?" "No." He turned her beneath his arm. The emerald necklace flashed beneath the chandelier. When she returned to him, his hand caught hers again. "You are my wife." His voice was quiet. "But tonight, Eleanor, I want everyone in this room to remember that." Silence. Then the music ended. Sebastian did not release her hand. Instead, he turned toward the assembled guests. His gaze swept across the ballroom. "If anyone in this house has forgotten who the Duchess of Blackthorn is," he said calmly, "they may speak to me." No one moved. No one breathed. Beatrice lowered her eyes. Sebastian turned back to Eleanor, and then he did something that shocked everyone more than the dance. He lifted her hand to his lips. Not the formal gesture of a duke greeting his wife. A kiss, slow, deliberate, public. Eleanor felt her face burn. Sebastian's eyes remained fixed on hers. "You should never have to wonder whether I will choose you," he whispered. She swallowed. "Then why did you never say so before?" Something painful crossed his face. "Because I was afraid." Eleanor's breath caught. The Duke of Blackthorn was afraid? Before she could ask what he meant, a glass shattered somewhere behind them. Everyone turned. Mrs. Whitmore stood near the doorway. The old housekeeper was staring at the emerald necklace. Her face had gone ghostly white, because beneath the necklace, hidden against Eleanor's collarbone, was something no one else could see. A tiny engraving. 3 words. She knew too much, and suddenly Eleanor understood. The necklace had not been given to her as a gift. It had been given to her as a warning. But Sebastian had chosen to place it around her neck anyway. Why? Was he protecting her? Or had he just placed a target on her back? Eleanor looked into her husband's eyes. For the first time, she realized something terrifying. Sebastian knew far more about the late Duchess's death than he had ever admitted. And he had just made a very public choice. He had chosen Eleanor, which meant that whoever had killed the last Duchess now had a reason to come after her. The ballroom slowly returned to life after Sebastian's announcement. But something had changed. No one laughed quite as loudly anymore. No one dared make another careless remark about the Duchess, and yet Eleanor felt more confused than protected. Sebastian had publicly chosen her. He had danced with her. He had kissed her hand in front of half the county. He had told everyone that she was his wife. But when the final guests departed and the great doors of Blackthorn House closed behind them, Sebastian released her hand just as quickly as he had taken it. "Good night, Eleanor." She stared at him. "That is all." His expression remained guarded. What else should there be? She almost laughed. "I don't know." Neither of them moved. The fire crackled behind them. Sebastian looked at the emerald necklace around her throat. "Keep that necklace." "Why?" "Because I gave it to you." "But you didn't." His eyes narrowed. "You're right." He stepped closer. "I gave it to you because I want you to understand something." "What?" "You are no longer alone." Eleanor searched his face. "And yet you are going upstairs without me." His jaw tightened. "Yes." The answer hurt more than she expected. He turned toward the staircase. "Sebastian." He stopped. She had never called him by his name before. Not like that. He slowly looked back. "Why do you keep me at a distance?" For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he answered quietly, "Because distance is safer." "For whom?" His eyes met hers. "For you." And then he walked away. Eleanor remained in the empty hall long after his footsteps disappeared. She should have been angry. Instead, she found herself wondering what kind of pain could make a man believe that loving someone was dangerous. The next morning, Sebastian found her asleep in the library. She had spent most of the night reading. The fire had burned low. An open book rested against her chest, and one of her slippers had fallen onto the carpet. He stood in the doorway. He should have left. Instead, he remained there. He noticed the candle beside her chair had nearly burned down. The window was slightly open. Cold air was pouring into the room. Sebastian frowned. He walked over and closed it. Eleanor stirred. Her eyes opened slowly. "Sebastian, you'll freeze to death." She blinked. "I was reading." "I can see that." He looked at the book. "You've been reading the estate histories?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I live here." Something almost like amusement touched his mouth. "That isn't an answer." "It is to me." She closed the book. Sebastian glanced at the clock. "It's 4 in the morning." "I know. You should be asleep. So should you." He stared at her. Eleanor smiled faintly. It was the first time she had teased him. Sebastian looked almost offended. Then, unexpectedly, he laughed. It was quiet, brief, but real. Eleanor froze. She had never heard that sound from him before. Neither had most of the household. Sebastian seemed to realize what he had done. His expression immediately returned to its usual severity. "You should go to bed. Will you?" "Yes." "Promise?" He looked at her. "I promise." She nodded. "Then good night." He walked away. But before reaching the door, he stopped. Without turning around, he said, "Leave the library door open." "Why?" "So I know you're safe." Eleanor's heart gave a small, foolish beat. All right. Their marriage remained strange. They rarely touched. They rarely spoke about their feelings, and they certainly did not behave like newlyweds. But little things began to change. Sebastian discovered that Eleanor hated roses, but loved lavender. The following week, Every vase in her sitting room contained lavender. Eleanor discovered that Sebastian hated overly sweet tea. The next morning, his tea arrived without sugar. He discovered she disliked riding in the rain. A second carriage was ordered for her. She discovered that his old war injury became painful whenever the weather changed. Without telling him, she began leaving a heated stone wrapped in wool beside his chair on rainy evenings. He never asked how she knew. She never told him. They simply began taking care of one another in silence. One evening, Sebastian returned from the estate soaked to the skin. He walked into the drawing room, expecting to find it empty. Instead, Eleanor was sitting beside the fire. She looked up. "You're late. I had business. You're bleeding." He looked down. A thin line of blood ran from his knuckles. Nothing. Eleanor stood. "Sit." Sebastian raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me. Sit." There was something in her voice that made him obey. She brought a basin of warm water and knelt beside his chair. Sebastian watched her carefully as she cleaned the cut. "You don't have to do this." "I know." "Then why are you?" She wrapped a strip of clean linen around his hand. "Because you're bleeding." He stared at her. That simple answer unsettled him more than any declaration of affection could have. No calculation, no expectation, no attempt to earn something. She simply cared. He looked down at her hands. "You shouldn't kneel for me." Eleanor glanced up. "Why?" "Because I'm your husband, and..." His mouth tightened. "And I should be the one taking care of you." She smiled faintly. "You can start tomorrow." For the first time, Sebastian had no answer. Weeks passed. The household began noticing. The Duke no longer ate every meal alone. The Duchess began appearing beside him at breakfast. Sometimes they spoke for 10 minutes. Sometimes they spoke for an hour. Sometimes they said nothing at all. But the silence had changed. It was no longer uncomfortable. It had become familiar. One afternoon, Eleanor found Sebastian in the garden. He was standing beside the old stone bench, the same bench where the previous Duchess had supposedly fallen. He was staring at the roses. Eleanor approached slowly. "You come here often." He didn't turn. "No." "Then why today?" Sebastian's fingers tightened around the back of the bench. "I was remembering." "What?" "My brother." Eleanor stopped. Sebastian rarely spoke about his family. "He died here?" "No." His voice became quieter. "He died because I wasn't here." Eleanor said nothing. Sebastian looked toward the distant trees. "I was away with the army. When I returned, everything had changed." She stepped closer. "You still blame yourself. I should have been here. You couldn't have known." "I should have." Eleanor reached for his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers. For several seconds, neither moved. Then Sebastian turned his hand over and held hers properly. Not because anyone was watching. Not because he had to. Because he wanted to. "Eleanor?" "Yes?" "If you ever find something in this house that frightens you..." He paused. "Come to me." She looked into his eyes. "Even if it concerns you." His expression hardened. "Especially then." She squeezed his hand. "All right." He lifted her fingers to his lips. The gesture was barely more than a breath, but Eleanor felt it long after he released her, and neither of them noticed the figure watching from the upper window. A figure holding another letter, a letter addressed to the Duchess. Because while Sebastian and Eleanor were slowly learning how to become husband and wife, someone inside Blackthorn House was patiently waiting for their growing closeness to become their greatest weakness. The first sign that something was wrong came with the accounts. It was a Tuesday morning when Mr. Collins, the estate steward, entered Sebastian's study, carrying 3 thick ledgers. His expression was unusually tense. "Your Grace, I believe there has been an error." Sebastian looked up from his correspondence. "What kind of error?" "The estate has lost nearly £8,000 in the last 2 years." Sebastian's eyes hardened. "Lost?" "Through repairs, supply contracts, transportation, and agricultural expenses." "Then find where." "I have tried." Sebastian closed the letter in front of him. "You've tried?" Mr. Collins swallowed. "There are too many altered figures." Before Sebastian could answer, the study door opened. Eleanor stepped inside. She was carrying a small stack of papers. "I'm sorry. I didn't know you were occupied. Sebastian looked at her. You're not interrupting, Mr. Collins immediately stepped aside. Eleanor placed the papers on the desk. I found these in the West office. Sebastian glanced down. What are they? Invoices. For what? Coal. He frowned. I already know about the coal contracts. I don't think you know everything. Mr. Collins looked uncomfortable. Eleanor opened the first ledger. The estate purchased 1,200 tons of coal last winter. Yes, Sebastian said, but the household used less than half that amount. Mr. Collins shifted. That is what the records show. Eleanor turned another page. No, she pointed at the numbers. That is what someone wants the records to show. Sebastian leaned forward. Explain. Eleanor placed 3 invoices side by side. These were supposedly delivered by 3 different suppliers. Yes, but look at the handwriting. Sebastian studied them. The same? Almost identical. She pointed to the signatures, and all 3 suppliers used the same warehouse address. Mr. Collins stared at her. Sebastian looked at him. Did you know this? No, Your Grace. Eleanor continued. I checked the delivery dates. She opened another document. On the 14th of January, the first supplier delivered 200 tons. She turned the page. On the same day, the second supplier delivered another 100, another page, and the third delivered another 100. Sebastian's expression changed. That would require 3 separate deliveries. Yes, and the roads were closed that day. Eleanor nodded. Exactly. Silence filled the room. Mr. Collins looked at the Duchess differently now. Sebastian did too. How did you find this? Eleanor hesitated. I was reviewing the household expenses. You reviewed the estate accounts. I was curious. Why? She looked at him. Because your steward told me the household could not afford to repair the east wing. Sebastian frowned. And you didn't believe him? No, Mr. Collins looked offended. Your Grace. Eleanor calmly interrupted. The figures didn't make sense. She turned another page. Your estate owns 300 acres of farmland, 2 mills, a quarry, and 6 tenant villages. Sebastian stared at her. She continued. Yet your annual income is barely half of what it should be. The Duke slowly stood. How long have you been looking at these records? 3 weeks. 3 weeks. I wanted to be certain before accusing anyone. That answer stopped him. She hadn't rushed. She hadn't confronted the steward. She had investigated, quietly, carefully, thoroughly. Sebastian walked around the desk. Show me. Eleanor looked surprised. What? Everything you found? She spread the papers across his desk. For the next hour, Sebastian watched his wife dismantle the estate's financial records piece by piece. She identified missing shipments, inflated prices, false repairs, duplicate payments, and finally, a series of payments made to a company that did not officially exist. Sebastian's voice became dangerously quiet. Who authorized these? Eleanor pointed to the bottom of the page. Your signature. His face went still. That isn't my signature. I know. Mr. Collins stepped forward, but it bears the Duke's seal. Eleanor looked at him. The seal was copied. Sebastian's eyes narrowed. By whom? I don't know yet, but you have a suspicion. Eleanor looked toward the window. Yes. Who? She hesitated. Your cousin. The room went silent. Sebastian stared at her. Why? Because every payment began shortly after he returned to Blackthorn. Mr. Collins looked horrified. You cannot accuse Lord Edmund without proof. I agree. Eleanor closed the ledger. That's why I haven't accused him. Sebastian looked at her for a long moment. Then something unexpected happened. He smiled. Not the brief amusement she had seen in the library. A real smile. Pride. Respect. Something warmer. You're remarkable. Eleanor blinked. I only read the accounts. No. He stepped closer. You saw what everyone else refused to see. She lowered her eyes. I've spent my whole life being overlooked. Sebastian's expression softened. Not by me. Her breath caught. He reached for the ledger, then stopped. Instead, he reached for her hand. You understand that you've just uncovered what may be the largest theft from my estate in a decade. I know, and you did it without a single servant. I didn't want anyone to know I was looking. Why? Eleanor looked directly into his eyes. Because someone in this house is lying. Sebastian's fingers tightened around hers, and now they know you are looking back. A chill moved through the room. Eleanor glanced toward the closed door. Then perhaps I should be frightened. Sebastian shook his head. No. He stepped closer. Be careful. His thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. And stay beside me. For once, Eleanor didn't tease him about keeping his distance. She simply nodded. But neither of them noticed the small crack in the study door. On the other side stood Mrs. Whitmore, and in her trembling hand was a note. Only 4 words were written across it. She has found the ledgers. The housekeeper closed her eyes, because now the person behind the letters had a new problem. Eleanor was no longer the helpless Duchess they had expected. She had become a threat. After the discovery of the ledgers, something subtle changed between them. Sebastian no longer looked at Eleanor as though she were someone he needed to protect from the world. He began looking at her as someone he wanted beside him when facing it. It started with the estate meetings. For years, Sebastian had conducted them alone. Stewards, landowners, lawyers, merchants, men twice Eleanor's age who had spent decades convincing themselves that a woman had no place at such a table. The first time Eleanor entered the study during one of those meetings, the room fell silent. Sebastian looked up from his papers. Come in. Eleanor hesitated. I thought you were busy. I am. He moved a chair beside his own. Sit, mister. Collins exchanged an uncomfortable glance with the other men. Eleanor sat. Sebastian continued discussing the harvest. Then one of the merchants began explaining why the estate needed to pay a higher price for grain. Eleanor listened. She said nothing, until the merchant mentioned a shipment from the northern farms. Those figures aren't correct. Every head turned. The merchant frowned. Pardon me. Eleanor pointed to the document. You've charged the Duke for transportation from the northern farms. Yes, but your company owns the warehouse at Darrow Bridge. The man blinked. Yes, and Darrow Bridge is closer to Blackthorn than the route you've charged. Silence. Eleanor smiled politely. So why are you charging His Grace for the longer route? The merchant opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Sebastian leaned back in his chair. There was something dangerously close to amusement in his eyes. Answer my wife. The merchant looked uncomfortable. I may have made an error. Then correct it, Sebastian said. The meeting continued, but Eleanor noticed something. Every time she spoke, Sebastian listened, not politely, not because she was his wife. He genuinely listened, and that realization made her strangely nervous. After the meeting, the other men left. Sebastian remained behind. Eleanor gathered the papers. You didn't have to let me embarrass that man. I didn't. She looked up. You were the one who embarrassed him. I merely gave him the opportunity. She smiled. You're enjoying this, very much. She laughed softly. Sebastian stared at her. The sound stopped. What? He shook his head. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. He had begun noticing things he had trained himself not to notice. The way her eyes brightened when she was amused. The loose strand of hair that always escaped near her temple. The way she pressed her lips together when concentrating. The quiet confidence in her voice when she knew she was right. He had once thought Eleanor was beautiful only in the way a quiet landscape was beautiful. Now he was beginning to realize that was not true. She was becoming dangerous to his peace because he wanted to look at her more than he should. That evening, Eleanor stood before the mirror preparing for dinner. She wore a dark blue gown. Nothing extravagant, no diamonds, no elaborate embroidery. Yet when she entered the dining room, Sebastian looked up from his papers and forgot what he had been about to say. Eleanor noticed. You're staring. Sebastian immediately looked away. I was not. You were. No. She sat across from him. You're a terrible liar. His eyes returned to hers. And you're becoming too confident. Perhaps living with you has taught me something. A faint smile appeared on his lips. Perhaps. Dinner began. For several minutes, neither spoke. Then Sebastian noticed something. You're not wearing the emerald necklace. Eleanor touched her throat. No. Why? I thought it was too much for dinner. That wasn't what I asked. She looked at him. Why does it matter? Sebastian's expression changed. "It suits you." The words were simple, but Eleanor felt them differently. She lowered her gaze. "Thank you." Sebastian looked at her for another moment. Then he said quietly, "Wear it tomorrow." "Why?" "Because I like seeing it on you." Her heartbeat stumbled. She tried to hide her smile behind her wine glass. Sebastian noticed, and for once he didn't look away. A few days later, Eleanor fell ill. Nothing serious, just a fever from spending too long in the cold rain. But Sebastian reacted as though the entire household had declared war. The physician arrived within 20 minutes. The fire in her room was rebuilt. Extra blankets appeared. Her tea was replaced every hour. When Eleanor woke during the night, she found Sebastian sitting beside the bed. She blinked sleepily. "You're still here?" "Yes. You should sleep." "I will. You said that 3 hours ago." He looked almost irritated. "You're keeping track." "Unfortunately." She smiled. He didn't. Instead, he reached out and touched the back of his fingers against her forehead. His hand remained there for a second longer than necessary. Eleanor looked at him. Neither spoke. Then Sebastian quietly withdrew his hand. "You're cooler." "That's good." "Yes." He stood. "Go back to sleep." "Sebastian?" He stopped. "Thank you." He looked at her. "For what?" "For staying." His expression softened. "I told you." He pulled the blanket higher around her shoulders. "You don't have to be alone anymore." Eleanor's eyes remained on him as he walked toward the door. "Sebastian." He turned. She hesitated, then whispered, "Good night." His gaze lingered on her. "Good night, Eleanor." The door closed, but he did not walk away. He stood outside it for several seconds, his hand resting against the wood, because he finally understood what frightened him. It wasn't the mystery, it wasn't the letters, it wasn't even the danger surrounding Blackthorn House. It was Eleanor. Somewhere between the ledgers, the quiet dinners, the late-night conversations, and the small acts of kindness. She had stopped being a responsibility. She had become the woman whose absence he could no longer imagine, and that realization changed the way he looked at her the next morning. Eleanor noticed immediately. "What?" Sebastian stood across the breakfast table. "Nothing. You're doing it again." "Doing what?" "Looking at me." A slow smile appeared on his face. "Perhaps I'm allowed to look at my own wife." Eleanor lowered her eyes. "Yes, and perhaps," he added quietly, "I'm beginning to realize I should have looked sooner." Her cheeks warmed. For the first time, neither of them pretended not to understand what was happening. Respect had become admiration. Admiration had become something warmer, and attraction, once carefully hidden beneath 6 weeks of silence, had finally begun to show. The first snow arrived 3 weeks earlier than expected. By late afternoon, Blackthorn House was surrounded by a white silence. The servants hurried through the corridors, carrying firewood and lamps. The horses were brought into the stables. The gates were locked, and for the first time in weeks, Eleanor felt uneasy. She stood beside the library window, watching the snow cover the garden. Something was wrong. She couldn't explain it. Perhaps it was the silence. Perhaps it was the way Mrs. Whitmore had avoided looking at her all day. Or perhaps it was the fact that Sebastian had not returned from the northern estate. He had promised to be home before sunset. It was nearly midnight. Eleanor walked toward the window again. Still nothing. Then she heard it, a horse, galloping. She rushed into the corridor. The front doors opened violently. 2 stable boys dragged a man inside. Eleanor froze. It was Sebastian. His coat was torn, blood stained his shoulder, and he was barely conscious. "Your Grace." Eleanor ran toward him. Sebastian tried to stand. "I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He collapsed against the wall. Eleanor caught his arm. "Get the physician." The servants scattered. Sebastian looked at her. His face was pale. "Lock the doors." "What happened?" "Lock them." "Sebastian." "Eleanor." His voice was different, not cold, not commanding, afraid. "Someone tried to kill me." Her blood ran cold. "Who?" "I don't know." He looked toward the entrance, "But they knew exactly where I would be." The physician arrived. The wound was treated. The bullet had grazed his shoulder. It could have been worse, much worse. But while the doctor worked, Eleanor noticed something on Sebastian's coat, a small piece of black fabric. She recognized it immediately. It was from the same material as the gloves worn by Lord Edmund. Her heart sank. Sebastian, he looked at her. She held up the fabric. Where did you get this? His expression hardened. Where? On the road. Who was there? No one. That isn't possible. He stared at her. There were 3 riders. Eleanor's stomach tightened. 3. One attacked from the front. Sebastian paused. The others waited near the woods. Then how did you escape? His eyes moved toward her. One of them made a mistake. What mistake? They called me by name. Silence. Eleanor understood. This wasn't a random attack. They knew him. They knew his route. They knew his schedule. Someone inside the household had told them. The same someone who knew about the estate accounts. The same someone who knew about the letters. The same someone who had been watching Eleanor. A servant rushed into the room. Your Grace. Sebastian turned. What? The west wing is on fire. Everyone froze. Eleanor looked toward the corridor. Smoke was already beginning to crawl beneath the door. Get everyone out. The household erupted into chaos. Servants shouted. Doors slammed. Children cried. The physician grabbed his medical bag. Sebastian tried to stand. Eleanor caught his arm. You're injured. My people are in that wing. So am I. He looked at her. Stay here. No. Eleanor, I said no. The fire spread faster. A servant screamed that the nursery door was blocked. Sebastian pushed forward. Eleanor followed. The corridor was filling with smoke. He coughed. His injured shoulder gave way. Eleanor caught him. Let me help. I can walk. Then walk with me. They reached the nursery. The door was jammed. Inside, they could hear a child crying. Sebastian stepped back, then slammed his shoulder against the door. Once, twice, the wood cracked. A 3rd time, the door burst open. He rushed inside. Eleanor followed. Within minutes, the child was carried safely outside, but the fire had trapped them on the upper floor. Flames moved across the corridor. Sebastian looked around. There is another staircase. It's blocked. Then the window. Eleanor looked down. 3 floors. No. Sebastian stared at her. You trust me? Yes. Then jump. What? He stepped toward the window. I'll catch you. Eleanor shook her head. You're injured. I'll catch you. The flames roared behind them. There was no time. Eleanor climbed onto the ledge. Sebastian stood below. Look at me. She did. Don't look down. She closed her eyes, then jumped. Sebastian caught her. The impact drove him to his knees. Eleanor cried out. Sebastian! He held her tightly. Are you hurt? No. He looked at her face. You're sure? Yes. His forehead dropped against hers. For several seconds, the fire, the servants, the screaming and the storm disappeared. There was only the 2 of them. Then Eleanor whispered, Why did you risk your life for me? Sebastian looked into her eyes. Because the thought of losing you terrifies me. Her breath caught. Before she could answer, a shot cracked through the night. Sebastian immediately turned. The bullet struck the stone wall beside Eleanor. He pulled her against his chest. Stay behind me. Another shot. Then silence. Sebastian's expression changed. He looked toward the dark woods. Everyone inside. Sebastian, now! The servants obeyed. Eleanor remained beside him. She had never seen him like this. Not angry, not afraid, furious. He looked at the burning west wing, then toward the forest, then back at Eleanor. This was never about the estate. What do you mean? They weren't trying to steal from me. He reached inside his coat and pulled out a folded paper, the same black seal Eleanor had seen on the letters. They wanted me to find this. He handed it to her. Eleanor unfolded the paper. There was only one sentence. The last Duchess knew the truth. Now your wife does too. Eleanor looked up. Sebastian's face had gone completely pale. Sebastian, he took the paper from her. I should have told you. Told me what? His eyes closed briefly. Then he whispered the words he had avoided for 4 years. The previous Duchess did not fall. Eleanor stared at him. She was murdered. By whom? Sebastian looked toward the burning house. I don't know. A pause. But I know why. Why? Because she discovered who was stealing from the estate. Eleanor's heart pounded. The same person? Yes, the fire burned until dawn. By morning, the west wing of Blackthorn House was nothing but blackened stone and smoking timber. No one had slept. The servants gathered in frightened groups. The physician had ordered Sebastian to remain in bed. He refused. His shoulder was bandaged, his shirt stained with blood, but he stood in the great hall giving orders as though nothing had happened. Move the horses to the eastern stable. Yes, Your Grace. Double the guards at the gates. Yes, Your Grace. No one leaves the estate without my permission. The servants hurried away. Eleanor watched him from the staircase. He looked exactly as he always had, cold, controlled, untouchable. But she had seen him the night before. She had felt his hands trembling when he thought she was in danger. She had heard his voice break when he told her to jump. He wasn't untouched. He was simply very good at hiding it. Sebastian. He turned. His eyes immediately softened when he saw her. Are you hurt? No. Are you certain? Yes. He walked toward her. His gaze moved over her face, her hands, her shoulders, checking for injuries. You should be resting. So should you. I have work. You have a gunshot wound, a graze. You nearly collapsed last night. I didn't. You did. He stared at her. She stared back. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then something unexpected happened. Sebastian smiled. Barely. You've become very difficult. Eleanor folded her arms. You married me. That may have been my first mistake. She raised an eyebrow. His expression softened. No. He reached for her hand. That was not a mistake. His fingers closed around hers. It was the first good decision I made in years. Eleanor's heart tightened. But before she could answer, a loud crash came from the corridor. Sebastian immediately moved in front of her. His entire body changed. The warmth disappeared. His hand went instinctively toward the pistol beneath his coat. Stay behind me. A servant appeared around the corner. Your Grace, forgive me. I dropped a tray. Sebastian's hand slowly left the pistol. The servant bowed repeatedly. Eleanor watched him. He was still standing between her and the corridor. Always, even when the danger was nothing. You don't have to protect me from a fallen tray, she whispered. Sebastian looked at her. I know. Then why do you? He didn't answer. That evening, Eleanor found him in the ruined garden. The snow had begun again. Sebastian stood beside the old stone bench, the place where the previous Duchess had died. Eleanor approached quietly. You shouldn't be here. Neither should you. She stood beside him. For a while, they simply watched the snow. Then Sebastian said, She was afraid. Eleanor turned toward him. The previous Duchess? He nodded. Her name was Clara. It was the first time he had spoken her name. She came to me 4 years ago, about the theft. Yes. He looked toward the ruined house. She told me someone inside Blackthorn was stealing from the estate. Did you believe her? I did. Then what happened? Sebastian's jaw tightened. I told her I would investigate. He paused. I left the next morning. Eleanor understood. And when you returned, she was dead. His voice became quieter. Everyone told me she had fallen. Did you believe them? No. Then why did you never tell anyone? He looked at Eleanor. Because I had no proof, and you blamed yourself. I should have stayed. Eleanor stepped closer. You couldn't have known. I knew she was afraid. His eyes glistened. She asked me not to leave her alone. Eleanor's breath caught. And you left anyway. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him more than the gunshot ever had. He looked away. I have spent 4 years wondering whether she would still be alive if I had listened. Eleanor reached for his hand. Sebastian looked down at their fingers. I thought I could protect everyone. His voice cracked. I couldn't protect her. You don't have to protect everyone. I have to protect you. Why? He looked at her, and this time there was no Duke in his eyes, only a frightened man. Because I cannot lose another woman I love. Eleanor went completely still. Sebastian seemed to realize what he had said. His eyes closed. For a moment, he looked almost ashamed. Then Eleanor stepped forward. She placed both hands against his face. You are not going to lose me." His breathing became uneven. "You don't know that." "No." She smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. "But I know this." She rested her forehead against his. "You don't have to stand between me and every danger alone." His eyes opened. "I don't know how to do this." "Do what?" "Need someone." Eleanor's heart broke a little. "You don't have to be ashamed of needing me." His hand rose slowly to her waist. "Eleanor." "Yes, I am afraid." The words were almost inaudible. The most feared duke in the county had finally admitted the truth. He was afraid, not of death, not of enemies, not of losing his estate. He was afraid of loving someone enough to lose them. Eleanor wrapped her arms around him. Sebastian froze. For a heartbeat he didn't move. Then his arms closed around her. He held her tightly, not possessively, desperately, as though she were the first safe place he had found in years. Eleanor felt his breath against her hair. "You're shaking," she whispered. "I know. You can let go." "I don't want to." "Then don't." They remained there beneath the falling snow. No titles, no duke, no duchess, no secrets. Just two wounded people holding each other in the place where one of them had once lost everything. But neither of them saw the footprints beyond the garden wall. Fresh footprints, leading away from Blackthorn House, and beside them lay a second letter. This one contained only 3 words. "She is next." The snow continued to fall around them. For several minutes, neither Eleanor nor Sebastian moved. His arms were still around her. Her cheek rested against his chest, and for the first time since their marriage, Eleanor could hear his heartbeat. Fast, uneven, human. She slowly lifted her head. Sebastian looked down at her. Neither spoke. There was no need. Everything they had refused to say seemed to be standing between them. Eleanor finally whispered, "Sebastian." "Yes, look at me." He did. His grey eyes were no longer guarded. There was no duke in them now, only the man she had slowly come to know. "I don't want you to protect me because you feel guilty about Clara." His expression tightened. "This isn't about Clara." "Then what is it about?" He looked away. Eleanor gently touched his cheek. "Tell me." Sebastian closed his eyes. When he opened them again, there was nowhere left for him to hide. "It is about you." Her breath caught. "I tried not to notice you." He gave a quiet, almost bitter laugh. "I thought if I kept my distance, I could keep you safe." Eleanor said nothing. "I told myself you were simply my wife." His fingers tightened around hers. "Then you started leaving the library door open." A faint smile touched her lips. "You noticed?" "I noticed everything." He stepped closer. "The way you take your tea, the way you hide your hands when you're nervous, the way you pretend insults don't hurt you." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "The way you walk through this house as though you belong here, even when everyone tries to make you feel like you don't." His voice softened. "And the way you look at me." She swallowed. "How do I look at you?" "Like I'm still worth saving." The words broke something inside her. "Sebastian, I don't know when it happened." He lifted her hand. "Maybe it was the first cup of tea." She smiled through her tears. "Or the library, or the ledgers, definitely the ledgers." He almost laughed. Then his expression became serious again. "But somewhere along the way, Eleanor." He stepped closer until there was barely any space between them. "You became the first person I look for when I enter a room." Her breath trembled. "You became the voice I want to hear at the end of a difficult day." His thumb brushed across her cheek. "And when you were standing on that window ledge last night," his voice broke, "I realized there is nothing in this world I fear losing more than you." Eleanor closed her eyes. A tear slipped down her cheek. Sebastian wiped it away. "I love you." 3 simple words, but they seemed to change the entire garden. Eleanor stared at him. The Duke of Blackthorn had finally said what neither of them had dared to name. He had not said it because she was beautiful, not because she was his wife, not because he owed her anything. He loved her because she had become home. Eleanor reached for his hand. "I love you too." Sebastian went completely still. "You do?" She smiled softly. "I think I have for longer than I wanted to admit." His eyes closed for a moment. When he opened them, something warm had replaced the fear. "Then why didn't you tell me?" Because you looked terrified whenever I came too close. He gave a quiet laugh. I was. Are you still? Yes. Why? He leaned closer. Because now I have something to lose. Eleanor's heart raced. Sebastian lifted his hand to her face. He paused. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. Instead, he whispered, "If I kiss you, I don't think I will ever be able to pretend this marriage is only an arrangement." Eleanor looked directly into his eyes. Then don't pretend. That was all it took. Sebastian leaned toward her. Their lips met softly. For one brief moment, neither moved. It was not the passionate kiss of two strangers swept away by desire. It was gentler, careful, almost reverent. The first kiss of two people who had spent weeks learning how to trust each other. Eleanor's fingers curled into the front of his coat. Sebastian's arm tightened around her waist. The kiss deepened. The cold disappeared. The snow disappeared. The ruined house disappeared. There was only warmth, only him, only her. When they finally separated, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. Eleanor smiled. "You're staring again. I warned you." "About what?" "That I was beginning to look sooner." She laughed softly. He kissed her forehead, then her cheek, and finally her lips once more. This time, Eleanor didn't hesitate. She leaned into him. For the first time, the Duchess of Blackthorn was no longer wondering whether her husband had chosen her. She knew, and Sebastian no longer feared that loving her would make him weak. Because as he held her beneath the falling snow, he finally understood something he had spent years refusing to believe. Love had never been the thing that made him vulnerable. Love was the reason he had survived long enough to find her. But somewhere beyond the garden wall, hidden beneath the darkness, someone was watching them. And the moment the mysterious figure saw Sebastian kiss his wife, a quiet voice whispered, "So he finally loves her." A pause. Then came the chilling answer, "Good. Now we know exactly how to destroy him." Spring came quietly to Blackthorn House. The snow disappeared from the garden. The blackened stones of the west wing were cleared away. New windows were installed. Fresh roses were planted where the old ones had once grown. And for the first time in years, the garden no longer felt like a place of mourning. It felt alive. But the greatest change had nothing to do with the house. It was Sebastian. The Duke of Blackthorn still frightened half the county. He still spoke little in public. He still expected his servants to be punctual and his business affairs to be handled perfectly. But inside his home, he had become a different man. He laughed more. He stayed at breakfast longer. He no longer disappeared into his study every evening. And most importantly, he no longer slept alone. Eleanor woke one morning to find sunlight spilling across the bedroom floor. Sebastian was standing by the window, reading a letter. She stretched beneath the blankets. "You're awake early." He turned. "I've been awake for an hour." "Why didn't you wake me?" "Because you looked peaceful." She smiled. "That sounds suspiciously romantic. I am married now. Apparently I'm required to be romantic." Eleanor laughed. He walked toward her and sat on the edge of the bed. "You're laughing at me." "I would never." "You are." She reached for his hand. "Perhaps I simply like this version of you." Sebastian looked at their joined hands. "So do I." The investigation into the estate had finally ended. Lord Edmund had been exposed. The forged signatures, stolen money, and false contracts had all been uncovered. And the mystery surrounding Clara, the previous Duchess, had finally been answered. She had discovered the theft. She had threatened to reveal it. And the men responsible had arranged her death. Sebastian had spent 4 years blaming himself for something he could never have known. But now, her name was no longer whispered in fear. A small memorial had been placed in the garden. Not because Sebastian wanted to live in the past, but because Clara deserved to be remembered for who she had been, a woman who had tried to protect the estate, a woman whose warning had ultimately saved Eleanor. And every spring, Eleanor placed fresh flowers beside the memorial. Sebastian always stood beside her. He never asked her to forget. He simply learned to remember without breaking. Months passed. The household changed with them. The servants no longer lowered their voices when Eleanor entered a room. The old housekeeper smiled more often. Mr. Collins began bringing financial reports directly to Eleanor, and the estate prospered. But there was one tradition Eleanor refused to abandon. Every afternoon, she made tea, 1 cup for herself, 1 for Sebastian, no sugar, exactly as he liked it. One evening, she carried the tray into his study. Sebastian looked up. "You're late." She raised an eyebrow. "Am I? 7 minutes. You counted? I always count." She placed his tea beside him. "Then you should know that I was helping Mrs. Whitmore choose flowers." He reached for her hand instead of the cup. "You could have sent someone else." "I could have. Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted to." He smiled. "That is becoming your favorite answer." "It is." He pulled her gently closer. Eleanor looked around the study. "This room used to frighten me." "Why?" "Because you were always in here, and now," she smiled, "now I know the man behind the door." Sebastian touched her cheek. "And what do you think?" "I think he's not nearly as frightening as everyone says." He leaned closer. "Don't tell anyone. I wouldn't dare." They kissed, slowly, comfortably, like two people who no longer needed to wonder what came next. 1 year after the night Eleanor had first been found crying in the garden, Sebastian took her there again. She wore the emerald necklace, the same one that had once been a warning. Now it was a symbol of something else. He stopped beside the rose bushes. Eleanor looked around. "What is it?" Sebastian reached into his coat. He pulled out a small velvet box. Her eyes widened. "Sebastian." He opened it. Inside was a simple gold ring, not extravagant, not covered in diamonds, just a beautiful band with a tiny emerald set into the center. Eleanor stared at it. "What is this?" "A promise. You already gave me a ring." "I know. Then why another?" His eyes softened. "The first one made you my wife." He took her hand. "This one is because I want to choose you again." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. Every day, every day. He slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he kissed her hand. "You were the woman everyone overlooked." Eleanor smiled. "And you were the man everyone feared." And somehow he drew her closer. "We found each other." She rested her head against his chest. What happened to the Duke who wanted to live alone? Sebastian looked toward the house. He made a terrible mistake. What mistake? Thinking an empty house was the same thing as peace. Eleanor smiled. "And now?" He kissed her forehead. "Now I understand." They stood together among the roses as the evening sun disappeared behind the trees. The garden that had once held secrets now held laughter. The house that had once felt cold now carried the sound of two people living, arguing, laughing, and loving beneath the same roof. Eleanor had once believed she was the woman nobody would ever choose. Sebastian had once believed love was something he could survive without. They had both been wrong, because sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the one person you cannot live without. And sometimes the coldest heart doesn't need to be rescued. It only needs someone patient enough to stay. As Sebastian and Eleanor walked back toward the house, he reached for her hand. She squeezed his fingers. Neither let go. Not that night, not the next, and not for all the years that followed. The Duke had finally found his Duchess, and more importantly, he had found his home. Emotional epilogue. Years later, people still spoke about the Duke and Duchess of Blackthorn, but they no longer spoke about the scandal. They spoke about the garden. The place where Eleanor had once cried alone became the most beautiful part of the estate. Every spring, the roses bloomed again, and every spring Sebastian would walk through the garden with Eleanor's hand in his. Sometimes they spoke, sometimes they didn't. They didn't need to. They had learned that love wasn't always found in grand declarations. Sometimes it was a cup of tea waiting on a desk, a coat placed over someone's shoulders, a hand reaching across a table, a quiet voice saying, "I'm here." Eleanor had once entered Blackthorn House believing she would always be the woman standing at the edge of the room. The woman nobody noticed, the woman nobody chose. But Sebastian had taught her something she would never forget. She had never been difficult to love. She had simply been waiting for someone who could see her. And Sebastian, the man who once believed distance could protect his heart, had finally learned that love was not weakness, it was courage. One evening, many years after their wedding, Eleanor found him sitting beneath the old rose arbor. She sat beside him. "You're quiet. So are you." She smiled. "I'm remembering." "What?" "The first night I cried here." Sebastian took her hand. "I remember. I thought my life was over." He looked at her. "And now?" She rested her head against his shoulder. "Now I think it was only beginning." Sebastian kissed the top of her head. "I would choose you again." Eleanor smiled. "Even after everything, especially after everything." The evening breeze moved through the roses, and for a moment Eleanor closed her eyes. She remembered the lonely woman she had once been, the frightened bride, the mysterious letters, the cold ballroom, the night Sebastian had found her crying, and then she opened her eyes and looked at the man beside her, the man who had once been a stranger, the man who had become her husband, her protector, her best friend, her home. Some love stories begin with a grand wedding. Theirs began with a woman crying alone in a garden and a man who decided he would never let her face the darkness alone again. And perhaps that is what makes some love stories unforgettable. Not that the characters never suffered, but that after everything tried to separate them, they still chose each other, again and again and again. Final CTA. So tell me, if you had been Eleanor, would you have trusted Sebastian after discovering his secret? And if you were in Sebastian's place, would you have risked everything to protect the woman you loved? Tell me your answer in the comments. And if this story touched your heart, don't leave just yet. Subscribe to Whisper's Hearts for more emotional stories of forbidden love, unexpected choices, powerful dukes, and women who discover that they were never as powerless as the world believed. Until the next story. Remember, sometimes the person everyone overlooks becomes the person someone cannot live without.